Our next panel is curriculum, and the moderator of that panel is another very dear friend of mine, and also for me a mentor and a role model. I get all the credit, not rightfully so, for being the guy who drives safe. But I got to tell you, if this person weren't here, we wouldn't be here. We perhaps were the two malcontents representing the left coast and the right coast. This guy does more behind the scenes and gets no credit for it, and he's very modest and very humble. But Rich Stoll is the man. He's the moderator of our next panel.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Doug. Welcome, everyone. Yes, we're going to talk about flight training curricula and the opportunities that we might have to redesign the delivery system in terms of training. And the first thing I'll do is start just by talking about who we have on our panel this afternoon. We'll just go down the row here. On my left, we have Dr. John Bertrand, who owns Windsong Aviation Training, retired professor of aerospace at Middle Tennessee State University. He'll talk about integrated training curricula and the new opportunities we might have there for redesign. Following John will be Master Instructor Dave McVinney. Dave is a designated pilot examiner and also a fast team representative in the Albuquerque FSDO. After Dave, we have Master Instructor Thomas Turner, who's the president of Mastery Flight Training Incorporated. He'll talk about developing effective transition and recurrent training curricula. And then down at the end we have Mike Shiflett, who owns MS Aviation, and Mike will talk about creating and delivering innovative, effective training curricula. And I want to start just by saying that I've been a full-time instructor since 1987, and my sole focus has been on stall, spin training, emergency maneuver training, upset training, a little bit of aerobatic training. And in the end, I kind of see the end result of training methods and curricula. I deal with that on a daily basis and have for a couple of decades now. And I can certainly appreciate what John King talked about in the safety panel this morning about the relationship of stalls, speed, and G-load. And so I appreciate and acknowledge that. It's an area I deal with all the time. And so this concept of redesigning, or at least offering opportunities to redesign curricula and methods, I'm thankful for having this opportunity. So let's start just by defining, well, what are curricula and methods? And for the purposes of our panel, we're going to really focus on the non-human aspects of the training delivery system. And that includes training course outlines, syllabi, of course, courseware, training aids, learning media. And then, of course, we have the simulator and the aircraft platform itself. And even though these are the non-human aspects of the system, make no mistake about it, these non-human aspects absolutely influence human performance. And so from that point of view, now we can talk a little bit about flying and how to design curricula and methods. And we have to understand that when we come into this, there are a lot of other areas outside of general aviation that have dealt with dealing with training people to optimum performance in physical and mental activities. And flying certainly is physical and mental, but there's also another component. And that is, it's a physical and mental activity that occurs under stress. Stressors. There are a lot of things that go on in this environment. So we have these three things, and there's been a lot of research done outside of the aviation community that I think we can take advantage of instead of having to reinvent the wheel. And so we can actually learn, just as an example, from sports psychology and the training techniques that they've developed for training elite athletes. And what they found was that as much as 90% of success in these types of activities is due to mental factors. And they also found that there's an optimum blend between the mental focus and the physical focus in terms of the training and the practice. About a 75% mental training coupled with 25% physical training is far more effective than 100% physical training. And I think we can apply this even in aviation. Also, what's important, as we move down the list here, the quality of the methodology is far more important than the quantity of training. Quantity of training really points to rote actions. And we've talked about rote as it relates to testing, but now just going out and doing the same thing over and over again just reinforces rote actions. There's no higher learning involved in that as well. And also, there's a motivation component. If we're just doing the same thing over and over again, we lose our motivation. And so ultimately, there's kind of a closed loop here. In order for pilots to stay motivated, of course, they come in as student pilots are already motivated. But the curricula and the methods, how we deliver that, we need to foster, create, and feed that need to learn. And by doing that, we then motivate the student to continue to learn. And so that leads to competence, of course, and that creates the need in the student to want to continue to learn. So now it's a closed loop. And so it all starts with these non-human aspects. And if we don't provide that up front, then of course it's rote, we lose motivation, we have high dropout rates and things of that nature that affect our industry. So if we break it down again, the mental and imagery aspects of training, if that's about 75%, kind of the optimum blend, syllabi, the training course outlines the things that the panelists will address here today. The physical aspect, of course, to 25%. And of course, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the saying that the cockpit makes for a lousy classroom. And so there are a lot of other things that we need to do before we get into the cockpit. And yet, flight line methods, for a lot of different reasons that we're not going to go into here, perhaps the breakout groups will address, flight line methods remain largely aircraft-centric. And again, we can draw on other fields outside of aviation that are doing a much better job of training people more effectively in shorter amounts of time. And of course, imagery, the imagery aspect does not ever replace the physical part of it. We're not advocating that at all. But we're saying the right combination of the two will have a significant improvement or effect on performance. And so some questions that we're going to ask ourselves and the panelists will address are current curricula and methods being implemented effectively and efficiently? Have integrated training curricula been proven to be effective? And then, of course, a couple of other things. What opportunities exist to decrease training time and cost while increasing effectiveness and safety? And how has curricular redesign been, or how might it be used to create more attractive programs to students, and as Bob mentioned earlier, the latent market, the people who might have a passing interest or no interest yet whatsoever in learning to fly. And so at this point, we'll turn it off to our first panelist, John Bertrand.
Hello. I wanted to tell you that I took my first flight lesson in 1966 from a fellow who had flown P-51s during the Second World War. And he used the approved Army Air Corps method of instruction. Now that included screaming and threats, violence, intimidation. You know, I'm inspired by what I'm hearing here today, but having said that, we have come a long way, and I think that deserves to be pointed out as well. I worked for MTSU for quite a number of years, and I had the privilege of working with Dr. Paul Craig. He and I were the principal investigators on a grant we received, a joint NASA-FAA grant that we received in 2004 to do ab initio training with glass cockpits. Now that was, at that time, a pretty wild idea. We took delivery of the first 5 G1000s ever delivered. We traded in 5 of our DA-40 Diamonds and took the first 5 G1000 DA-40s. And we took them as true TAAs. They came with high-end autopilots, you know, all the goodies to make them a modern, technically advanced aircraft. We saw this as an opportunity to do things differently. And so primarily Paul wrote, so far as I know, the first FAA-approved 141 private instrument combined syllabus. And we implemented that as a research project, which we ran for about a year. We had 45 kids through the project. We did our best to control for extraneous and intervening variables. So just to give you an example of that, we made sure that none of our students had ever seen a round dial before, or in fact had ever been in a light airplane before. And we started from scratch. We included in that, now bear in mind we have some advantages. These are college students, so you can tell them to do things, which is not the case with my present customers.
You might want.
I'll get to that in a minute. So we told them to do this. Go off and get the Garmin computer interactive trainers for the software that we're going to be using for the G1000 and become basically competent with the help of your instructor on the G1000 before you ever sit down in the airplane for the first time. We were in the position to have them taking the ground course that accompanied our 141 syllabus simultaneous with the training, which, as you know, in real life out there in Part 61 sometimes doesn't happen the way we'd like. And we bought what was then, not so much now that Redbirds are out, but what was then a very high-end non-motion simulator. These were the Frascas. I'm sure you've seen them. They've got the 13-foot high screens that are concave, and you can even log VFR in them. The video on those screens is of movie quality. When you turn final at Murfreesboro on that simulator, the name of the factory that's out there off the end of the runway is right there on the screen on the simulator as well. I mean, it's pretty good. We therefore instituted what amounts to an integrated program. You'll notice that my slides sort of talk about, we call it Mitsu. Talk about Mitsu versus Windsong. When I came home from New Zealand following my retirement from the state, I realized I didn't really want to quit work. What I wanted to do was quit working for a giant bureaucracy. And some of you may appreciate that. So I started a small flight training company at a very obscure little county airport in Tennessee, and I run, I guess, what you'd call your bone traditional Part 61 training program these days. We use Piper products, and we do it just the way people have always done it, pretty much the way I did it back when. Given the kind of customers I get who are adults who wish to own and operate their own airplanes, and the resources which are available to someone on my level of operation, doing it the old-fashioned way is about all there is available these days. We try to update and upgrade in every possible way, but I mean, I'm committed to that, but having said that, there isn't a lot available. So you'll see that my slides sort of, I'm not going to talk about the slides directly, but what they do is they sort of contrast what I perceive as the best outcome that we could have gotten at the time we did this project to, sort of what I'm doing right now. We spent a year, we ran 45 kids through the program. We spent a year doing it. We, of course, had to develop the way we would, this was a totally new idea, and scenario was a word I'd never heard before in aviation until about 2002, when I worked in the SATS program as a visiting professor up in Langley, at NASA Langley in 2002, and that's the first time I ever heard the word. It was a big deal at that time. At least it was for us. I mean, we're just from Tennessee, but it was a big deal to us at that time. And so we were starting really without thinking we knew anything for sure, but we knew we wanted to do things in a different way. So we spent that year working out with our instructors so that every kid got as much as possible a standardized approach to in the cockpit flight instruction. We worked with our young instructors constantly in this regard. We made sure everyone got access to the entire program, and as you've just heard, we integrated that program to the greatest extent that we possibly could. The outcomes were very good. Now, I'm going to admit off the top end, yes, it's a self-selection process. Yes, kids don't go to a college like MTSU unless they're highly committed to flying. And yes, they're college students. You can tell them to do things. And so we had some inherent advantages. But having said that, the outcomes were very good. The average student in our program received the private and instrument license on an afternoon and the following morning, since it was, and I guess still is, 2 check rides, at an average of 88 hours. We did qualitative interview study. We did a qualitative interview study following the receiving of the certificates for most of our kids. they were better in terms of aeronautical decision making and judgment issues than our traditional students by a long shot. Every lesson we did was, we don't call it scenario training, we call it mission-oriented training. Every lesson given was a mission, and it was astonishing the extent to which the kids made sense of what going from here to there and coming back, involves and means, as opposed to just simply learning this little bit and that little bit, and then you hope a miracle takes place and the kid integrates it all together somehow mentally. 88 hours is astonishing. I might add that I took 30 of those kids when it was all over. And remember, we had control. We actually even covered up the emergency instruments in the aircraft. We put placards over those. And so we did everything in our power to make sure none of these kids had seen a round dial. I threw these kids in a 152 that had nothing but a NAVCOM and a transponder, threw them under the hood, and made them take what amounted to a check ride. Out of the 30, 29 passed going away. The kid who flunked got lost inside the VOR approach and he ran it okay, but he never did a letdown. So we were 800 feet in the air when we got there. But that isn't so bad. It's astonishing how well this turned out. Paul has since done the same thing with the commercial license. If you want to see these, the generic versions of them are on the FAA website. They're available to anyone. And they work very well, at least in the situation we had there. Well, would that work for me at Windsong? And the answer is, well, gee, my customers now are adults who want to own and operate airplanes. And when they walk out the door, I've got no further hold on them. I do my best. I call them. Of course, I'm trying to sell them an instrument ticket and then something else. But in truth, I don't really have a hold on them anymore. And it's hard to say what comes out because I really have no way to. I don't have any way to hold them. What I'd like to have, if my wishes came true, what I'd like to have is something as a 61 operator that is analogous to what I had at MTSU. I think what we did at MTSU shows beyond a doubt there are some real efficiencies to be had in flight training if you have the right equipment in the right situation. And I think it also showed, the other thing that we found was that scope and sequence definitely needs to be addressed. More than 3/4 of our kids, and of course what happens with scenario training is the solo gets put off a little bit. Most of our kids were soloing at 18, 20 hours. Because remember, they're going somewhere and coming back every time. What we found out was 3/4 of them could shoot a successful under-the-hood GPS approach down to 50 feet before they could land an airplane, before they soloed. Believe me, scope and sequence can certainly be investigated, and I think there are some real efficiencies to be had in training curricula and in training methods. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Up next, we have Dave McVinney.
Thank you, Rich. Top button makes it work. Thanks, Rich. Appreciate it. Yeah, that's me. We'll get past that right away. First thing I want to say is I'm glad to be here. I am a pilot examiner, like Pat and like Tom, and as they mentioned earlier, check ride jitters are really a big deal. And quite frankly, looking at all these people out here, I got the worst case of check ride jitters you'll ever hear. I've never seen a group like this all in one place, and it's really a wonderful thing that they're here. Before we get into that, we've been talking about student starts, and we've been talking about the dropout rate, our inability to keep students on board. I really wasn't involved in the beginning with FITS. As a matter of fact, the master program is what got me into FITS, and I got invited to look at some of Michelle Phillips' work and comment on it, which was, I really felt pretty good about that because they were collecting input from the industry. From there, I was a chief flight instructor at Part 61, Part 141 schools for, going on since 1994 or so. And I got to see it from the 61 side of the house more than the 141 side of the house, more than from the university or the collegiate level. We were handling the folks off the street like they do at Windsong from the get-go, and we didn't have that luxury. Okay, so there's FITS. Okay, and like I said, I'm not the best guy here. Tom Glista and Michelle Phillips and, of course, Arlen McMahon are all here. But it's been around for a while, since version 1.0 came out back in '04, back in January '04. And I took a look at it, and the first thing that impressed me was the pages and pages and pages of definitions and explanations, and it was really, really difficult to get into it, to really try to think about it. First of all, we're a 141 school. How many people here have written a TCO and gotten it through the approval process? All right? That's not an easy thing. And when somebody comes along and says, hey, this is a better way to do it, why don't you do that all over again? The answer doesn't come quite as easy. Okay? All righty. The methodology for FITS focused on scenarios. And like you, Rich, I hadn't really thought of the word scenario in the flight training industry. And when I first looked at it, it looked like they basically relabeled rote and application, correlation, and those words, and just changed the words on it. But when we got to the single pilot resource management side of the house, you got a realization of how important it was to teach these people to think. You know, we're at 88% are caused by decisions made before people take off. So as an underwriter supporter, I would like to see my rates go down by a comparable amount if we could address that. The other part about it that they added was the joint instructor and student lesson assessments. And this is something that we've typically done an extremely poor job at. I remember one competing FBO in Albuquerque. He's no longer in business, and he said the most effective flight training operation I could conduct would be if the instructors would change students on the ramp. All he wanted to do was turn the propeller in the cash register. Right. Fortunately, we've gotten beyond that, but in students I've talked to recently, I've asked them, I said, well, you know, it's the check ride, we want to loosen them up a little bit. What part of your training did you like the most? Okay, and they tell us. What'd you think of your instructor? Was he good? Was he bad? Most of them really didn't have a concept of what it was because they maybe have only had one or two and they had nothing to compare it to. I'd ask them what they didn't like about their private pilot training, and they'd tell me that it was the solo hood work. All right, so the TAA transitions were the genesis of the FITS program, 1,000 to 500s. I was lucky enough to go to the Cessna program and go through their G1000 FITS program, and I've been benefiting ever since. After that, it translated into the commercial and instrument programs. And as John had talked about earlier, MTSU did a fantastic job in showing us what we can do with a program if we apply it correctly. Arlen McMahon, who's sitting back there, was thoughtful enough to put together a book to try to help instructors figure out how to do this scenario-based training, because there wasn't an awful lot of it out there at the time. Where are we now? Well, over the past, since you called me, Rich, I've talked to a number of different flight schools and flight instructors, and some of them were senior in the school. And we said, well, what do you think of scenario-based training? And they'd say, yeah, scenario-based training. We've been doing that for a long time. It's a wonderful thing. And I said, well, what do you think about FITS? And they went, about what? All right. And that's partially due because it is in the current FAA handbook. And it's not really talked about as FITS. Jefferson and King schools, as we said, have integrated it into their programs, and I've had a chance to look at some of those. I have a gentleman who's up in Washington who works with the light sport community, and he's working with the Cessna program. He's very, very happy with the program. He's one of about 4 or 5 instructors up there. But the problem is he loves the computer system, and he loves FITS, and he puts together his own scenarios, and he's written subsequent programs to make that work. And out of 8 instructors, he's pretty much the only one that's using it. Okay? When you go back, and the data is obtainable, where you can go back and say, how many people have we enrolled in the computer-based training program, whether it be through Jefferson or through King schools, and you'll see the enrollments up here. And you'll go down and you'll look at the ground school records, and those people will rip through those ground schools. Hey, they think that's just the greatest thing. And then you get to the flight training records, and it almost looks like the computer stopped working. Right? Went through some scenarios where we've graduated some people using the CPC program. And when it comes to the record review, as you go through all of this and prepare the student for the check ride, and it takes longer sometimes to reconcile those records because basically the instructors like the way they've been doing it. They don't want to do it a new way. It's too much of a pain. And it's a real shame because it's a good way to keep track of where the student is. If we have an instructor change off, then they know where to go and how to work it. So we're doing a really, really lousy job as far as the documentation goes. Jefferson's come out with a new training record that emphasizes scenario-based training, and they emphasize pre-lesson planning, where the instructor is supposed to sit down and say, okay, this is what's next. And you look at the records and it's extremely spotty. So we've given these people wonderful tools to do a better job, but our role as supervisors and as mentor instructors, we've really fallen flat on our face. We really haven't been doing what we need to do. And if we want to make these programs work, then we're going to have to do a better job at that. Okay, we've already covered this. Course approvals again. Only the large organizations have implemented. There's one person in here I know who has an individually approved FITS program, but mostly it's just the major universities and the colleges. The Part 61 people aren't really that interested in doing it. Okay, no real advantage. And the FSDOs, not that many people know how to do the approvals. Okay, I feel there's less flight training competition because most little airports now can't support more than one flight school, and the flight school that's out there only has flight training because it's required in their contract to sell gas. So we have a lot of operations out there that are just doing it as a contract requirement, and of course the high resistance to change factor. We do have a heightened sense, if you will, of scenario-based training, and the students in the programs usually do better. All right, can we improve? It was never intended as a mandate. But we can as we train the new CFIs and as we supervise the CFIs, like Arlen does in her program. It takes a personal interest in making sure that they do a good program. We can make them better pilots. Other than that, there's been a white paper that's on the SAFE website that talks about flight instructor and student interpersonal relations. We are not grocery store salespeople. Okay, we haven't put all the groceries in a basket and push them out the door and hope they know how to cook. We've got to follow up, and we need to make sure that they use those tools that we've given them. Thank you.
I left my stuff. I'm sorry.
So thanks, Dave. Next up, Thomas Turner.
Is there a handbook that goes with this? Okay. Hi, I'm Tom Turner. Thank you very much. Let me first say I'm truly honored to be part of this symposium. I was really excited when I was asked to talk about transition training and recurrent training. In the interest of the 10-minute time limit, I've limited this discussion to this afternoon to the issue of transition training, and I will hopefully will be able to talk about recurrent training syllabi and such in the breakout sessions tomorrow. When I first started my flying career, I was an instructor. I was the only instructor around at a little airport in the middle part of Missouri. And the flying service I worked for belonged to a local physician who was successfully using the small flight training school basically to pay for his ownership and operation of his Cessna 210, which was not one of the planes in our program. But he felt the need to check me out, or to check me out in a Cessna 210, primarily so that I could be the one to take it to the shop when it needed a new avionics job or a pedostatic check or something like that. So I got really excited because I was a brand new instructor pilot. I had about 15 total retractable gear hours, and so I spent probably about the better part of a week going through the pilot's operating handbook on this airplane, getting really excited about going and flying in a Cessna 210. So my boss came out to the airport one day. He had flown B-17s in the Second World War. A lot of flying experience, obviously. So we get in this 210, we take off, we go out, we do a couple of turns, and he comes back and says, okay, well, what does a checkout, back in the early 80s, what did a retractable gear checkout consist of? All right, 3 takeoffs and landings. You're checked off, right? So we came back in, and I had done my homework, and I looked at the weight of the airplane, and I knew what speeds I needed to fly on final approach. Well, we had about a 5,000-foot runway at this airport, and the first turnoff was maybe about at the 1,200-foot point, and then you had to go all the way to the far end of the runway before there was another taxiway exit. And my boss was well known for coming in solo in the Cessna 210, using 4,500 foot of the runway and smoking the brakes. And we were very frequently changing tires on his airplane. So, I didn't know what to make of that. So I didn't know that much about it at that point. I just knew that according to the way I figured it out in the handbook, I was supposed to come in and land at about, my final approach speed with full flaps was supposed to be about, if I remember correctly, about 65 knots. So I did my darndest to try to nail 65 knots, and I got down, and without using much brake at all, I very easily made that first turnoff. Whereupon my boss said, "You're flying your airplane way too slow. You can never fly my Cessna 210 again," and I never did. All right? But the point is that there's a way to check out in an airplane, and then there are the ways that a lot of us get checked out in airplanes. Now, one of the most complimentary things that you can say about a pilot is that pilot can fly anything with wings. We idolize the pilots that have flown dozens or even hundreds of different types of airplanes. And it's true that a seasoned pilot can get into any type of aircraft and probably fly it quite well, especially if nothing goes wrong. But if they're operating the airplane at a wildly different weight than they're used to, or if they have even a very minor malfunction, or anything's a little bit unusual for them, their chances of successfully completing the flight are going to be much greater if they have in some way transitioned to that airplane. And the pilots that, if you read the biographies of the Bob Hoovers and the Chuck Yeagers, the people that we think can fly anything with wings will tell you that they put in quite a bit of study before they go fly the airplane. And that's what we need to work into our transition training program. Now, our friends at the NTSB, of course, track such things. This is from a report that was released in 2010. It actually covers 2006 accident data in the United States. And it shows that of the accidents, the NTSB reportable mishaps in 2006, approximately 41% of them occurred when the pilot had less than 100 hours time and type. Now, our friends in the insurance industry are going to tell us that there are a whole lot more accidents than what get into the NTSB record. And I would suspect that, Jim, you'd probably say that a large percentage of those are low time and type airplanes or pilots as well. Now, we think of transition training when we were me back in 1988. I'm going from a Cessna 172 into this 210. But the accident mishap, or the mishap record will tell us that the problem is just as prevalent when someone is moving down in capability in an airplane. We see that a lot with light sport now. Traditional pilots moving into light sport airplanes and having stick and rudder type accidents in the airplanes because of the different weights and the different wing loadings of the aircraft. They're not used to the airplane. So we as an instructor community and those of us in the regulatory world need to think about how we can get people successfully past that first transition into the airplane, because clearly if we can improve the accident statistics in the early time people are flying airplanes, we'll be able to make a substantial improvement in the overall accident record. Now, there are a number of FAA documents. There's certainly a lot of industry documents as well. I'll talk about a couple of those in a moment. There are a number of FAA documents that help us as instructors design effective transition training syllabi. The Airplane Flying Handbook has a number of chapters that talk about things like transferring knowledge into complex airplanes, retractable airplanes, turbo propeller airplanes, I love that term, turbo propeller airplanes, and pure jets. But the concepts are very, very generic, and they don't apply to a specific airplane at all. Advisory Circular 61-9B was issued in 1974, and that is FAA guidance on transitioning into complex and into multi-engine airplanes. It gives us a lot of good ideas. Again, none of it quite type-specific yet, but it does get us a little bit closer to the concept of designing a training program for an individual type of airplane. A couple of issues about that. Number one is by its title, Complex and Multi-Engine, it reinforces the notion that you transition upward, but you don't necessarily transition laterally or downward in aircraft capability. And then the other part of it is that 91.6 Bravo is no longer available on the FAA website. Very, very recently, we've heard it mentioned here just a little while ago, the FAA published Advisory Circular 90-109 entitled Airman Transition to Experimental or Unfamiliar Airplanes. Now, some of you know that the job I have that actually pays the bills is I'm the Executive Director of the American Bonanza Society's Air Safety Foundation, and we've been working with the Experimental Aircraft Association, and Jeff Edwards is back there somewhere, and there we go, and some others. We're starting to look at ways that we can achieve components of the FAA's 5-year safety plan by combining the knowledge of the type clubs. Some of the serious people out here are involved as well, I'm sure. We'll be getting together on that. And this document here really starts to give us some focus to what we can do. The impetus for EAA's involvement in this is the word experimental. The title, unfortunately, I think turns off a lot of people because there's great information there about designing a type-specific transition training program. But since it says home-built airplanes or experimental airplanes on the cover of the document, a lot of us aren't going to be looking at that. So take a look at that. It really does have some information. The insurance companies, however, are the real arbiters of pilot transition. When you figure that the underwriter is sometimes betting literally millions of dollars on the safe outcome of this pilot's flight, it stands to reason that they're going to stipulate some requirements for the pilot to go through before they will turn them loose with the airplane and have the coverage be in place. But even there, sometimes we fall short. We instructor pilots have to pick it up a little bit because most insurance company checkout requirements are going to tell you you have to get 10 hours time in type or 5 hours dual flight instruction before you're covered to fly as pilot and commander of the airplane. And in the Bonanza Barron world, I see this a lot, especially because we'll have somebody in Southern California buy an airplane in the Detroit area. They have an insurance policy that says they have to get 5 hours of dual flight instruction to be covered as pilot and command. And so what they do is they arrange for somebody to meet them in Detroit, fly as far as Dallas on one cross-country trip with one takeoff, one landing, one cruise phase, and they have met the requirements of 5 hours of dual instruction. What we really need to be thinking about, I think, is quantifying that a little bit. How many takeoffs and landings do you want to see? What sort of maneuvers do you want to see? It's a bit of a throwback here because we're talking about incorporating scenario-based training, and you would think at first that cross-country flight would be a good way to do that. The reality is that we need to think in terms of stick and rudder training as well when we're doing POH type-specific type of training. There are a number of commercial products that are out there available. My friends at King Schools, my friends at Sporties have told me on several occasions that although the market is still very good for training materials that are designed to assist someone through the process of passing a practical test or a knowledge test, frankly, the market's never really existed for a good software package on how to fly a Cessna 172. So that's where we as instructors need to come up with our own individual curriculum using the Pilot's Operating Handbook as a basis. The folks out there have the capability of creating great materials, but if we can't expect them to lose money on it. So we have to come up with it on our own. And then lastly, I've already done the full disclosure about Type Club programs since that's my day job, but the Type Clubs are probably the best single resource for knowledge on individual airplane types. We saw an introduction to some absolutely superb programs that COPA has for training its pilots, and most Type Clubs right on down through the Tailorcrafts and Arancas and the Cessna 120s will have good guidance for you to provide a checkout for your instructors or for your new students. So lastly, the FAA, insurance companies, and flight instructors really must reinforce to our students that there is a vital need to get checked out in an airplane. And the concept that I fly a Beach Bonanza so I can jump into this Cessna Skycatcher and be perfectly safe is roughly the equivalent of an airline pilot saying, I'm a 767 captain, so hey, there are the keys to a 737, I'm going to go fly this. We need to make pilots feel, as, for want of a better word, as uncomfortable getting into a different type of airplane with less capability than the one they're used to flying as they are getting into an airplane that's more capable. And then turn that around so they have that same level of comfort and confidence when they fly whatever type of aircraft they're flying. I look forward to some comments from you all tomorrow on this and on the concept of recurrent training. Thank you very much.
I'm the founder of MS Aviation, and what we're doing, we're a technology company, but we make pilot training products. And we made a pretty innovative step that I want to talk to you about, and how you can sort of align yourself with this sort of thinking. First, I set out, let me see if I can grab the slide, to make a case for change. Say students typically stop flying before solo or just after. A lot of the aeronautical knowledge starts right after solo, so there's a very minimal amount required, and then all of a sudden there's this enormous amount of stuff that has to be mastered. And typically we do that with DVDs, books, and other sorts of things. The problem I discovered was that books and DVDs don't offer a great opportunity for marketing or for gaining metrics from what was done. So the students can see this academia, this wealth of stuff they have to know is pretty overwhelming. So I said, can I kill paper? Can I kill paper? Eric, I said, can I kill Eric? I said, no, I can't do it. So here's what I discovered. Paper versus eBooks. If you look at the bottom, paper's still preferred. These are the number of eBooks. This was a student survey of college bookstores. And it says that in October of 2010, that was the percentage, about 12% were doing ebooks. But look what happened here just recently, last month or so, went up to 18%. So there's growth here. Digital age is coming upon us. It's not going to kill paper yet, or maybe never, but it's coming. Of those who these are of those who preferred paper, what do they like about it? You know, would they do it again? These sorts of things. So let me work through these, just a couple here, and get to the meat of the matter. People who preferred paper preferred it. 50% of them preferred that to digital because they could hold it in their hand. They loved the concept. They liked it because they didn't lose access to the content when the course was over, and there was they liked the idea they could sell it, resell it, and get buyback from it. Those who preferred digital, it reduced weight in their backpack. It was a single device. We use iPad mostly. All the courses were in one place, and they just preferred the technology. This was the source of the research project that went on. So I said, okay, I can't kill paper yet. Okay, so what do I do? Clearly, it's obvious that paper is not going to be obsolete in the near future. So let's just let digital stuff do what it does best, which paper cannot do. And that is, it can be searchable. You can have very tight integration to the lessons. And it can be open to really quick changes. And we can enable social networking within the digital realm, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. So what's the proposition, right? It can't be just we can't just use digital to replace paper only. That I think is clear. It has to have all the value of the DVD. It has to be integrated, and if someone has online training products, they can't have online training products just because they can say they're online. It really has to have forums, social sharing, and integration of research, wikis, and Facebook and Twitter. And we're going to come right to the heart of that and tell you how we're doing Facebook and Twitter. Here's traditional media. The way it's typically delivered is paper, DVD, and software. The online or cloud-based stuff, you can have limited access, you could have lifetime access, subscription-based, any number of things there. And then where we are is in mobile. And this can be resident or streaming and has all the advantages of online. And it's resident on the iPad, iPhone, or other mobile devices. Here's the advantages. You probably know them. DVD is physical. People love to, especially pilots, control freaks, we love to have and hold and resell, so that's why DVDs are quite popular. No internet connection is usually required. But online, we start expanding our capabilities, and we're able to now do quizzes. We're able to gain metrics back from what the student is doing, which we could not do with DVD or books. And then mobile, it's always available. I have my iPad here, I have my iPhone, I can do whatever I want within the courseware, and it's tracked, and it keeps track of where I am. And the course is resident, so I don't need to download anything except for the first time. Here's what we need to enable. We can enable we can integrate advertising and location-based services. So this might not be for a paid application, but we have the ability, because we're on mobile devices, to say where that person is by GPS, and then deliver up ads about flight schools, about any aviation services we want that are absolutely location-based. So if a person is going to do flight training in Denver, and they're in Denver, maybe something would come up for Independence Aviation back there. So we could serve that up. We could serve information about pilot supply stores, all that on the mobile device. Social sharing. Now we have new opportunities for schools, and we've enabled a really interesting way to do that, which I guess I'll tell you now, is that what we do in our courseware now is we allow students to go through the course of training on the iPad, online, or iPhone. And then as the student gets successes based on quizzes or solos, we already have Facebook and Twitter accounts signed up for them. Those are there usually, and they agree to have posts to that. It'll post out to Facebook their successes, but it also posts back a link back to the flight school they're training at. And so what we do, in this case, you can imagine that a person may have maybe 10 or so students, or 10 or so real friends, really close friends, and they'll tell those close friends about their learning to fly. But on Facebook, they may have 100, 1,000, 300 followers, or friends. They may also have a lot of Twitter followers. And so by enabling that link back to the flight school, we set up a landing page, which is just a place where that link goes to, and it might say something like, glad you're following us on Facebook and Twitter. There's a free barbecue every Thursday to talk about learning how to fly. So now we can attach, and we can get all these people coming in, we hope, that are friends that maybe would have never got the message, and they're seeing this message over and over and over again, and it's coming from a reliable source. Because when people want to learn how to fly, they usually look to a friend who flies and say, where did you go? Well, this is telling them where they go all the time. The other thing we can do with online and mobile is we can change content quickly. So by these metrics, we're able to grade out. For example, let's say a student does a flight on whatever it is, steep turns, come back and there's some runway incursion issues that come up. So the instructor can grade that out, we gain that metric, and then over the time we can look at all the flight schools that use our product or the product and say, everybody's having trouble with runway incursions. What can we do about that? So we go to FAST team and we say, what do you have on runway incursions? And they say, this is what we have, and we deliver it almost in real time to the iPad or online to satisfy that, and we measure the metric. So this is how we can really change flight training. Summary, the goals. We don't want to replace paper or DVD. We want to complement. We want people to try to switch over to digital and sort of get out of your mind the idea that online is bad or that there has to always be a paper solution. Once you enable online and mobile within your business, you'll have the ability to empower social networking and drive business to the school and get better retention. You know, we have a customer in South Florida who uses our products, and he issues iPads to every student that comes in the door. It's required. When you go downstairs, people are not getting this bunch of books and they say, here, read this stuff. They get something they're really going to use, and the student looks at it and goes, wow, I can't believe I'm getting this. And all the courseware is loaded on, and the buzz that gets created on it is amazing. So this is the vehicle of choice. It will be the vehicle of choice for later. I wouldn't say it's the vehicle of choice at this instant, but we're trying to make it that way. And if we don't go that way, we'll never be able to enable all those little outlets where we get information from FAA or FAST team. We get information from SAFE, which might be you've got a white paper, you've got a video on something that's very important that we can shove out to all the customers almost in real time. We will lose that. So we definitely want to move towards the digital or the online or mobile ways of delivering training products. And that's the way I see it. Let's see. So I would say to let digital technology play out its strengths where it can do that best. And we can make a very flexible delivery platform by doing that. And then measuring the students' progress and modifying the content as we go is a very critical step. And as you or we as a group get information about what we want to change, here's a way, if we're using this kind of platform, where we can test those ideas and measure the metrics, and that, I think, is really critical. Okay, so our training materials, to sum it up, should really help us sell aviation. When you walk into a flight school, they shouldn't be in the glass counter saying, oh, we'll get to that one day, and then all of a sudden your students are packed on with a litany of books and practical test standards and advisory circulars. Let's make it sexy, and let's make it so the student helps sell our business to the students. That's what I really like to see happen. I think we have really nice airplanes now. We have really nice facilities. We need to get the training products to really help sell aviation. And the last part is, if we do that, we can enable additional revenue streams perhaps for the flight schools, and that's something very compelling for them, because it's hard to get their ear, but when you say, I think I can drive students to your business by social networking, they start calling. So anyway, that's what I have to say about it. I hope I enlightened you a little bit, and I'm going to tweet right after this, just so you know. All right, thank you. Yeah, you bet.